Welcome to the Beauties and Beasties podcast with Alex and Sean.
Hello. How are we doing?
I'm okay. I was waiting for you to say that. Yeah, I'm okay. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Been a busy week, been a good week, been a productive week, all things that I enjoy. Got some really big projects going on at the main job. And it's really nice to be involved in some big projects, some exciting projects. Nothing I can really talk about, but you'll see it. You will see it at some point, I have no doubt. So there we go. How about you? How have you been doing?
I'll check my diary and I'll tell you what we've done this week. I will, yeah, that's what it's like. So what have we done this week? Monday was a day in the office with the secretary, which went incredibly well. We got loads done. I've had a lad away on the Advanced B course Thursday, Friday, and he's had a good time doing that. Drain surveys are starting to come in now. You know, rats are on the move, aren't they? They are absolutely.
This is that tip, isn't it? This is the tipping point. It's started to get a bit wet. The temperature's gone down. Insects are starting to fall away a little bit, and we're moving into the harvests. I don't know if how close you are to any fields or rural environments, but harvests came in a little while back, so we've got silos full of food. Animals are going to be moving about. It's that most I'm not going to sing, but it's that most wonderful time of the year, isn't it, where we're going to start seeing.
So did I tell you I got a new kitchen put in? I don't know if everyone's aware or not. I moved house and we bought a very old house that hadn't been touched since like the old lady moved into it when she was 10. Totally untouched. So it's been ripped out, got a new kitchen put in. It's been replumbed, rewired, all that sort of stuff. We're finishing off a little bit of plastering yesterday, and I got a phone call off a plasterer saying, "You got a drip in your ceiling in your kitchen." Like, brand new kitchen. And I was like, "Right, how bad is it?" "You need to come home." And coming down the A19, got stuck in traffic. When I got there, bad. Really bad. Really bad. I don't like to a point, when it's that bad, you don't even get upset because it's just beyond that.
Yes,
it was. I promise you, it was that bad. So we've done that. Then tell you one of the interesting things you will like. Don't know if you've seen it. One of my pals rang us up and said, "Will you come and have a look at a honeybee job with us?" The old lady has died. The house has been left to a charity. The charity are trying to sell the house to raise funds because that's what they do. And there's a honeybee colony that believe in the chimney because the living room is filled with honeybees. He said, "I went in the other day and he said, I think they're drones or big fat round ones. But there's loads of them in the living room, like smashed against the window." I said, "Yeah, okay." And he said, "The problem is, the main issue is it's got to get done. It's got to get done fast. And the chimney looks very, very unsafe." So I went, "Okay, no bother." Gets up there, walks in, hundreds and hundreds of apparent bees on the windowsill. There is pollen shit up the windows, Long story short, it was drone flies.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I looked at it, I said, I didn't know what they were. I thought it was a hornet mimic fly or something like that. I know about rat-tailed maggots. Believe it or not, I'm not that clued up on them. Ended up Google lensing it, drone fly, and then I was like, I thought it was wasp nest. This is like detritus, and he was like, "Come and look at this."
I imagine there's a dead bee nest up there, and they've been absolutely ripping it. No, what?
No. Went upstairs, looked out the window, and in the little courtyard at the back of the house, there must have been pigeons in that courtyard for the last 20 years undisturbed. Gutters were filled, roofs were filled, floor was filled, and with it being a courtyard, it had blocked the gutters, and there was wet patches with the shit in. and these drone flies had obviously just come from that, but there was thousands of them in the house, in every room in the house, thousands of them.
So Henry the Hoover and a can-do attitude, or did you just fog it?
No, we didn't even do that because they need a long-term solution, and he'd already spoke to them about the pigeons outside. So it's a proper decontam outside, and a netting job and a proofing job and all that sort of jazz. So
There's a
household
long-term solution, but there's also the immediacy of that short-term 10,000 flies per room. That's cool. I love
just to clarify, there's no one living in the house. The house is done. It's finished. So yeah, it's an abandoned house, so there's no need. But yeah, so it's a clean-up job and a netting job, and it's an incredibly real awkward place to net, real awkward place to sort out real persistent pigeons.
I'll tell you one of the projects I've got. So one of the long-term projects I've got going on at the moment, and this kind of leads into our special guest who we'll bring on immediately after I tell this little anecdote. But I've been doing a decomp study. Have I told you this? I'm sure I have.
Yeah.
But we've been doing a long-term study where we've been looking at the decomposition rates of rodents in different environments, and then measuring it against the scavenging or the rate of scavenging against animals in those same environments. And that's been going on now for we started that just in January, so 9 months that this has been going on. And it's really interesting because we've gone through winter through to summer, and now we're coming back down to winter again. And the behavior of the the scarification insects and all of these and the actual scavengers over the last couple of weeks to month has changed radically with the wetter weather, with all of these other things. And it's quite interesting to see actually that Graham Turner from the MPTA went on some media platform today, I can't remember what it was, to talk about all of this wet weather bringing out the rats, because of course it's going to be flooding all of their subterranean homes. So it's an interesting time, this time of year, both for the animals that predate rats and mice, for the animals that decompose rats and mice, and also rats and mice being displaced heavily by this adverse weather. So all of that absolutely fascinating, and I think this probably falls into the wheelhouse. Should we get our special guest on today just to have a weigh in on some of this? Is she ready? I think she is.
Yeah.
Welcome to the stage. Hi. Welcome. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm very good. How are you doing?
Oh, we're doing grand.
Are you Irish?
I am indeed. Surprise.
Yeah, I was expecting an American.
With a name like that, hardly.
Yeah, but there was a lot of immigration over there at one point, wasn't there? So I just presumed you were of Irish descent.
I think the new generation of Irish try and not proliferate the unpronounceable names for the next generation. So I tried to give my kid a normal Irish name that everybody could say, because they'd probably even have trouble with Sean.
I just have trouble, full stop. It doesn't geography, history, culture. I just struggle flat out. So
well, when most people say Niamh and think Niamh, they think Niamh or Niamha or Niamamaha. I sound like a Japanese motorbike most of the time when it comes out of an American's mouth.
How long have you been in America for then?
10 years.
10 years. That's a long time to be associated with Japanese motorbikes. Absolutely.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
So would you care to just introduce yourself to our listeners? Because Sean, Hugh and I have followed your exploits for a little while in one form or another, but many of those listening may not have done. So a little bit of an introduction would be absolutely fantastic if you could.
Sure. My name is Niamh, and I work for the University of California, the Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources, which is interesting because I don't actually really work in natural resources or agriculture most of the time. I mainly focus on applied research and what we call extension, which is pretty much teaching people how to send rats to Jesus. That's what we do. And my job is kind of 50% research, 50% education. I gave you guys a fright because I was a little bit late, because we were actually organising our classroom for the West Coast Rodent Academy, which we host twice a year, every year, in Irvine in California, where we educate pest management professionals on, you know, just everything there is to know about commensal rodent management. But I also do a lot of research on the effects of rodent management on wildlife. So we do research on rodenticide exposure in wildlife, mainly on coyotes or coyotes, which are very, very, very abundant here in Southern California. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I mean, before I got here, I did my PhD in Ireland at the National University of Ireland in Galway, and I worked on small mammals there as well. But I've also worked in actually, after I finished my PhD, I was in the US for a while, and then I was in then I was in Liverpool, actually, at the University of Liverpool for a very brief spot.
Oh, the School of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene.
Huh?
The Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene.
I was actually at the School of Biology, I was working on a parasitology project, which was pretty interesting, but not really my thing, parasitology. And then I worked in Southeast Asia for a while at the International Rice Research Institute, which was also quite the experience, and did a little stint in Romania, and then back here to the US.
That is a whirlwind tour, and there is a whole host of stuff that I really wish to pick out. I'm
done being a hobo now, though. I'm done. Like, I am firmly done. Like, if I could stay in my bed for more than 6 hours, I'd be happy.
Wouldn't we all at the end of the day?
Yeah.
But I mean, the very first thing I have to congratulate you on the phrase "taking rats to Jesus," because I am going to take that one home, and I think a lot of our listeners are going to start using that particular idiom.
It's definitely interesting in California, because wildlife management is everybody wants to save everything here, even sometimes the rats. So it's a pretty interesting place to work.
I mean, that's a fairly interesting.
California does. I know one boy who doesn't over there, who is incredibly good at taking stuff to Jesus.
Oh yeah,
you know, incredibly good, up close and personal. It's quite interesting when you have different sayings. Dale, one of the lads who works for me, when people always go to him, "What are you going to do with the rats?" He looks at them and goes, "Do you want the Disney story?"
Yeah.
No, he goes, "All right, no bother. We'll leave it at that."
We have a collared coyote that is physically trying to get inside someone's house to eat their cat, it's pretty normal for coyotes to eat people's cat, but not pretty normal for them to try and get into people's houses. And the woman, our collar is not functioning anymore, which is totally normal for wildlife research, and the collar will eventually degrade and fall off, and it's not impacting the welfare of the animal, because if it was, we would be mandated to go out and catch the animal. And the lady's like, "Oh, it's so inhumane, you have to come and catch the coyote and take the collar." And I was like, "Sure, we would come and catch the coyote, but we would also just take the collar and let it go again." And then she never emailed me back, so that's okay.
Sometimes members of the public can be wonderful. It makes our job a rich and vibrant tapestry. I think is where we'll go with that. I mean, just to backtrack on some of the stuff that you've done there, because oh lordy, that was just an absolute roller coaster of places that you've been and things that you've done and the rest of it. And I'll preface that to say that the reason I jumped in with the London School of Tropical Medicine is because my father actually studied there, but he studied medical parasitology.
Interesting.
And the School of Biological, the biology school and the tropical medicine school, they're not that far apart, are they? I think it's
no, they're not. No. Yeah, they're pretty close. But Liverpool was handy. I just never really settled very well in Liverpool, because it was I'm from the east coast of Ireland, and so airport to runway to runway was 30 minutes.
Really?
It was whoop, whoop. It was so funny watching the Ryanair air stewards trying to run up and down the aisle, trying to hawk all the stuff really quickly while we were up in the air.
that's literally a tactical trebuchet at that point. You could have loaded someone into a catapult and probably done it easier and probably not a huge amount quicker, to be
Yeah, and
honest.
I lived right on that side of the of the city as well. I was really close to the airport, and like I was probably only like 30 minutes from the airport then to get home in Ireland. So like I basically commuted to work.
No, you were
I mean,
commuting
kind
from-
of. I mean, I probably go home at least once a month, but sometimes I went home more. And so I just never really settled in Liverpool. So I kind of just I was only there for about like 10 months.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So come on, we've been following some of your, to now let's backtrack a little bit. You've obviously had, quite an illustrious and, varied career in academia and with research institutes. But how did you find yourself moving from parasitology and, general wildlife and moving into what we would call public health pest control or, professional pest control?
Well,
How did that transition occur?
Well, part of it was my first job when I finished my PhD. My first job was as pretty much as a research technician with the organization I work with now, and my job was to send rats to Jesus, but in almond orchards. And if you were ever in an almond orchard or in a citrus orchard in California, you would never drink a gin and tonic ever again with a pile of almonds in front of you because, I mean, you guys know. I mean, I know you guys know, right? So the stuff we see, like I'm scared. I can't eat in airports anymore. I just can't. Like, I just seen too many things. I'm just like, no. But
I do say, like in pest management, like the longer you do pest management, the fewer places you go out to eat at the end of the day, isn't it?
yeah.
Because you end up just seeing behind. And it's one of the things that I love and hate about pest management, which is you get to see behind every closed door. You get to see behind every lock and key. There's no part of a building that's off limits to you. And sometimes you really wish there were, because there are some restaurants in my local area where I will just not go to anymore.
I'm most Californians see a bait station and they're disgusted, and I see a bait station, I'm like, oh Jesus, thank God. I was like, I hope there's good pest management here. Yeah, so I got a job here, and I really liked it, and I liked this kind of the mix between the research and the education, and I feel like that's a good way to be not a snobby academic that's really disconnected from the people that you're trying to help. And so it's nice to have be with that, like with the people that you're trying to help. So like, as opposed to being like outside at your desk looking down and trying to find solutions that you think would work. I think in the extension system, there's a really good connection between what we would call our clientele, and my clientele are like pest management professionals. I mean, I have different groups of clientele, but and so I really like that connection and the fact that like is really applied. I really enjoyed the applied work, and there's not that many rat whackers all over the world, and so there's a lot of interesting things to do. And there's I mean, I think everybody looks for anticoagulant rodenticide, and it's kind of a bore at this stage because it's just everywhere. And so it's nice to be able to have the opportunity to think about it in a little bit of a different way, which I feel like we are doing.
So I seem to remember I read a paper probably a couple of months back now, and I believe that you were involved in the project where there was bromethalin found in coyotes, which shouldn't occur because it's assumed that it's not a bioaccumulative like chemical, but
I don't know. I don't think I was on that paper, but the assumption is the problem is there's always assumptions and there's never actually research to back it up. And so the assumption is wrong. I would say there's a paper from Maureen Murray in Tufts University, kind of more in the northeast of the US, and she's found it in a lot of raptors, which are not raptors are not getting primarily exposed to rodenticide. They just aren't. And I know from here a decent proportion of our felids, so our mountain lions, bobcats, things like that, are also and like out of like coyotes will eat anything. Like literally, we've found baseball bats, upholstered furnitures, people have found condoms. Like they would literally eat anything, right? Anything. But cats are way more finicky. And so cats are, it's very unlikely that cats are getting primarily exposed to, like, even if you think of it in your own situation, like the chances of a domestic cat getting primarily exposed to a rodenticide application is pretty low. Even if it was right there in front of them, they just look at it and give it the finger more than likely. So, whereas a dog or, you know, like me, I have a golden retriever that would literally eat anything also. And so, but I mean, it definitely, it bioaccumulates somehow, but I think the jury is still out on actually what is actually going on. But yeah, you guys, it's not registered, right? Bromethalin's not registered in the EU.
It is currently not, and I have to say for that I am personally quite grateful. I think it's quite a disruptive. I'm going to be politically savvy here, but I don't think the mode of action is particularly humane with bromethalin.
I don't think any of them really are humane. I mean, even a snap trap is not a nice death, really. I mean, most of the snap traps are not fairly straightforward. Some of them, yes, but not most of them, no.
So strange enough, there was a call in the UK. There was a paper done by a lady called Sandra Baker, who did studies into the impact and clamping force of commercially available snap traps, not professionally available snap traps, just commercially available ones. And the worry was some of these ones that you were finding on large online resellers, some of the rat traps had an impact and clamping force lower than that of some of the mouse traps being offered. And yeah, I said there's tremendous welfare concerns within that particular sphere, but also there's technical concerns as well, because if you have a rat running around with a snap trap on its head like a party hat, you know, disturbed but not, you know, harmed, so to speak, it's never going to go near another plastic object again, which really kind of like hampers our ability to control them. But with that, it's, you know, you're right, you know, at the end of the day, there is no good way to die, is there? You know, any mortal endpoint, we're biologically driven and designed to survive.
And I think it's unfair to think that pest control operators, or I don't know what you guys call them in the UK, we call them pest professionals here, pest management professionals. Like, I think it's unfair to think that people, like, yes, you can enjoy your job, and yes, you enjoy when you find dead things in your job, but like, you don't, like, from A to B, you want it as short as possible and as humane as possible. But you can only work with the tools that you are provided with, unfortunately. And so, I mean, probably the most humane way for a rat to die is to get its neck broken. And, you know, if it's under 200 grams, you can do that here in the US. But nobody's trained to do that. Nobody wants to do that. I mean, I'm trained to do that, but not many people are trained to do that. So,
I years and years ago went through my training to do that. It's a very hands-on thing. It is not a particularly pleasant thing either. It's not one of those things where you go up behind it like in the movies, like a ninja. It requires a small amount of exactly that, kung fu chop. So yeah, it's back to the point that there's no good way to die, but there are definitely bad ways to die. Let's put it that way. And I would consider bromethalin to be more to that camp than the others. It's onset, but either way, let's leave it at that. But to come on to more sort of like modern, more contemporary studies you're doing. Can you please tell us, because we kind of like put some pictures up about this in our literature going forwards, but what's this we hear about you giving rats haircuts in your latest experiment?
So it's a bit of a long story, so just to let everybody know the lay of the land here where I am in California is we mostly have rattus in our kind of in general, like across the board, commercial, industrial, like residential. In the big metropolitan areas like Los Angeles, you would have roof rats in the Norway rats in like the downtown areas. And then as you go out and it becomes more residential, and LA is just a big massive sprawl, you get like kind of a mix, and then as you get more and more residential, you kind of get more more roof rats, as we call them, rattus. And then there's pockets of mice. Mice are kind of locally rare in California, but not locally rare in the US at all.
What mice are we talking of? Because when we talk about mice We call it musculus, yes.
Now we have
But
our own
you
names here as well. Actually, it's funny because the deer mouse here looks very much like the wood mouse. Or field mouse, in the UK and Ireland. And I actually did my PhD on the field mouse, and because they look so similar, for years and years and years, when I would see a picture, my brain would just automatically say wood mouse, and people would be like, "Excuse me, what are you saying?" So we mostly work on roof rats here, and so a long time ago, this started a long time ago. The kind of where we are now started a long time ago. So what happened is that we have, as you guys have, issues with secondary exposure, or just detections of rodenticide exposure, particularly anticoagulant rodenticides in our wildlife here across the US, but in particular there's a lot of focus on California because we have the mountain lions, the celebrity mountain lions essentially, that can live in downtown LA, which just blows my mind. And so there was no evidence in the literature that coyotes ate rats. So I was like, well, how are coyotes getting exposed to anticoagulant rodenticides if they don't eat rats? And yes, they could be getting primarily exposed, but one would assume that the majority of the exposure is probably secondary. And so I was like, well, we need to do a couple of things. We need to figure out what is getting into our bait stations, and B, figure out if we can make modifications to our applications to prevent that thing getting into our bait stations. So we set out, we got a normal conventional style bait station. We put one on the ground, and we're working with roof rats, so quite an arboreal, like off the ground species. So we put one in a tree, and we were in something like 90 residential backyards across the county that we're in. And a couple of things came out of that. One was that we didn't actually get that many non-target species. We detected lots of non-target species, but essentially the bait stations were essentially doing their job and keeping most of the non-target species.
What are you considering a non-target list? Because of course, non-target is a range of things, isn't it?
Oh my God, there's so many in the US, right? So you've got your non-target rodents, right, which are your native rodents here, which would not generally be listed on the labels for your anticoagulant rodenticides for urban residential applications. So in here you would have your tree squirrels. Okay, so same kind of squirrel, not this, well, actually, funny enough, similar squirrels to what you guys have in the UK and that you guys gave us in Ireland. Boo. And not the same species, but similar.
I don't think we did it on purpose. I think that was...
No, you definitely did it on purpose. You brought them in a picnic basket to Ireland and you let them go. Yeah. So so we have tree squirrels, but we also have a ground squirrel species that's native. And then we have native mice and native rats that can be found in urban residential areas as well. And then we have our mesocarnivores, so possum, skunk, raccoon, all of which could potentially access bait stations. And then we have, and this is urban residential areas, and we've all detected these. The next thing would be coyote or coyote, whatever you want to call it. And then bobcat. Now, we didn't detect the mountain lion, but there are chances that you could have mountain lions in urban residential areas and also bears in urban residential areas. So when you talk about non-targets, it's a very, very big, long list in the US and in California. And I mean, there could be areas where the non-targets are even more diverse.
I don't want to be the lab assistant having to give a brown bear a haircut, so it can be identified later. That strikes me as bad.
Yeah, so that's kind of what we were like. And so our idea is that if coyotes are getting exposed by eating one of those things, can we prevent them getting exposed by lifting the bait station off the ground? And so the next thing is that there was actually no difference in the interaction of the rats, like the target species, between the ground and the elevated stations, which is good, because if we wanted to reduce exposure, we'd want to make sure that there was no difference if we put it off the ground.
And we're still talking ratus here, not
still ratus, yeah, only. And most of the time we only work with I only work with ratus actually most of the time. And so that was that. And so we found that also not only were hardly any of them entering, but if you lifted it off the ground, almost none of the target pests, or none of the non-target species would enter off the ground. And so that was all very, very interesting. But the big thing for us is that not only were the non-targets not entering the bait stations, but the targets were also not entering the bait stations, no matter where you put them. So we had this. And the way we do it is we only use game cameras in front of our stations, and we have certain measures of, I guess, interactions. And one measure is like discovery. So like that's almost like the rat is touching the bait station. And then entry is like, like at least their head is in the bait station. Okay, that's kind of our measures. And so like we look at time to discovery and time to entry. And so time to discovery over all the studies we've done, and you guys are more than aware of this, is hugely variable. Like, so some rats will go in straight away, but in some places where the bait stations have been discovered, it'll go from that, and discovered means we're almost certain the rat knows the bait station is there. Now, it's always impossible for us, but we think if it touches it, it more than likely knows that it's there. It goes from going into it almost straight away to never going into it ever. And so 65% of stations that are discovered are never entered. Now, our problem with this, right, is that we don't know which rat is which, right? So it could be the same rat over and over again at the bait station that isn't going in, or it could be 50 different rats going to the bait station that are not going in. And so we were just really surprised that this is happening. And like, I was like, oh my God, why is there none of this in the literature? Of course there's this in the literature. And if you go back, like way, way back, there's mentions of, failures before, like there was major resistance. And it's more than likely related to, rats not going into the bait stations. I think it's a QUI. I think he was a British guy too. He's done work on it as well, showing that, and then that rats don't enter. So, and this is mostly brown rats as well, right? The Norway rat. And then there's hardly anything on Rattus rattus. And then also some research showing like just this whole kind of aversion to the container for the bait and not the bait itself, which is related, right? It's just a fancy way of saying rats don't go into bait stations. And I was like, okay, so like this is not, me saying that bait stations are maybe not as effective as we thought they were. There is evidence in the literature that it's there. And it's not, I don't think it's neophobia. I think some of it's neophobia, and I think some of it is the rats give I was about to swear. Maybe we can swear in this process, but they give a shit, basically. It's not swear in Ireland. I was going to say a worse word than that. But the rats give a shit and just don't want to go in. Right? They don't want to go in. They don't have to go in. There's like so many different things that it could be that we're not really sure what's going on. So that's a good bit ago that all happened. And so,
but before you get onto the next bit, just very quickly, because I believe the bit of research you're talking about to sort of like elucidate folks here, the research, I think it was Buckle and a couple others, did that research where they took plastic bait stations and they put them alongside wooden bait stations and they put them alongside natural materials, and they found that the natural materials and the wooden bait stations were chosen, and I think the preference was 70% of the time over a plastic station, which goes to show that exactly that the scent, the makeup, the actual bait stations have a tremendous impact on that conversion between discovery and entry, and that's really fascinating stuff. And for you to see it in tree rats as well is just goes to show that it's equally as poignant. Did you try after you made this recording? I'm trying, words fail me. After you observed this, did you try replacing these arboreal stations with wooden stations just to see if that changed their behavior from, discovery to entry, if it reduced that time down?
So not during that experiment, but when we moved on, we were trying to think like, what can we do to improve the use of the bait station? And it's particularly important if you're using acute rodenticides that your rat's going to go in there, they're going to eat enough, and that's hopefully it, because we don't for urban residential applications in California, we do not have access to any anticoagulant rodenticide anymore. So all the way from warfarin all the way up to Brodifacoum, all gone. Unless there is a public health outbreak, nobody's really sure exactly what consists of an outbreak. You won't actually get permission. I don't even know of anyone that's had permission, but it's kind of been like a sliding scale. The second gens went first, and people in California are obsessed with getting rid of difecinone, so difecinone went next. And then after that, chlorofenicin and warfarin, so they're all gone. That's it. We don't have any other anticoagulant rodenticides registered in California. So now we have cholecalciferol, bromethylene, and lightsabers. No, that's a joke. I mean, I think you're just going to have to, I mean, eventually, and bromethylene will go eventually probably in California as well, because there's a decent amount of evidence that avochlorose is registered in the US, but it's impossible to, there's no vendor for it, I believe. I think that's how it goes. I'm not sure exactly what it is. So I believe avochlorose is registered, but it also only really works on mice. And we're talking about, we're only talking about roof rats here. So talking about like replacing with a wooden station, we didn't really think that, well, like I'm trying to be a little bit more practical than a wooden station. We were trying to be like, is there, like, what can we, because I know as well, like I even know, like, if it doesn't stack right in your truck, you don't want to buy it, right? And so like we're even trying to think like more on like what's already there and can we improve what's already there. So we looked at different stations, and we wanted to actually print our own station. And I was actually at Pest World, and I was like, we use these things called tracking tunnels to do population indices for our rats, and they're just these long cardboard tunnels that have these little tracking pads inside them. There's ink in the middle, and the rats run through them. They use them all day, every day. And I was thinking to myself, maybe the shape of the bait station's not right. Maybe we need this long tunnel, and it would work really well. And I was at Pest World, and I was talking to a few of the sales reps or whatever, all from just different companies. We were all just chatting and shooting the shit. And one guy's like, oh, like this thing. And I was like, of course I'm not that smart. Of course someone's already made it before. So
a cat's eye.
Huh?
I think we call them cat's eyes in the UK.
It's called the Snap E here. It's made by Kness. I don't know if they're a vendor over in the UK, but what we did is we looked at 3 different designs. We looked at conventional design. As far as I'm concerned, the big black box, they're nearly all the same, right? They go in, they turn the corner, they go back in again. They're almost, you have some of them that have the flow through, but we have, I don't know how in the UK, but we've very few now where the rat goes in and doesn't have to turn around twice, if you know what I mean, to get to the bait. Whereas there's somewhere you can go and you can basically see, it's a run through, right? You can basically see out on both sides. So we tested that. We tested a rock. Do you guys have the rock stations in the UK?
Yeah, they're the ones made by Bell, aren't they?
And Bell and JT Eaton. We use the JT Eaton one, and then we use this tunnel one that's made by thing to see if there was like any difference in design. Like, does that, like, is it the design that's affecting the entry? No, it's not. Spoiler alert.
I was about to say we should have just done a poll between me and Sean to see.
Sorry.
Didn't. Oh no. So you say so actual sort of like box construction has very little impact after entry.
Well, that's what we found for roof rats, right? Rattus rattus. Now, there are other designs out there, a few other designs out there. There's obviously other sites, there's other species that you could try, but I think that it's all telling a fairly similar story. And it's funny, I talked to someone yesterday, and they were like, oh, we want to make modifications to the existing design to make a better station. I was like, why? I was like, throw the baby out with the bathwater and just start from scratch. And I was like, you know, and there's a guy at UCLA at the University of California in Los Angeles that just, and maybe you guys have read the paper, that wrote a paper on the history of the bait station. And it's a really, I think it's one of the best conference presentations I've ever seen in my whole entire life. The guy's an anthropologist. Actually, he would be a really great, I think he'd be a good guest for your podcast. But we were just talking, I was talking to him, and I was like, was the bait station developed for keeping non-targets out, or was the bait station developed to control rats? And it was developed to control rats, and it was developed to try and keep non-targets out. But I think that we need to go back to the grindstone and figure out, like, we really need to work. Sorry?
Can I tell you what I think?
Yes, please.
I think you're getting it fucking terribly wrong.
Oh yeah.
I think you're thinking about the design of the bait station, and in my experience, and obviously it's a test of one, I think it all comes down to placement. I think it comes down to
it absolutely 100% could be, but like, I mean, we have a humongous sample size, right? We have 90 different sites.
If my lads were here, we have a farm that we can keep clear of rats with traps, with no scent in it, with no bait in it, with no nothing in it. And it comes down to placement, and it comes down to, well, I believe there's a difference in behavior on a rat that is moving on to a site and one that is established.
Oh, I'd say so, yeah.
Station, yeah. But if you can, we put ours in a way where, what I say to my lads is, you have to put it in a place where the rat sees it as a harborage point, not as a feeding point. So you can like tuck it in somewhere. So, for instance, if you go into the corner, if you went into the corner of a building, there was a hole drilled through a wall, you'd be like, block it up because a rat's going to go through. You can see straight away. So, like as a pest controller, I go, you've got to do that with your box. You've got to do that with whatever you're doing. That rat has to basically run over there and think, that's a safe place. And then once you get that, they just run into it over and over and over again.
I agree that placement probably does have a huge impact, but like we've done this multiple times now, not just once or twice. We've done this at least 3 or 4 times, and we keep getting the same response, at least for ratus. So but I think that placement, I think that, like Sean, what you're saying is, and I always wanted, one of my colleagues has a rat dog. Now, it's a rat detection dog. It's not a ratter, okay? And what they really want to do is they really want to see if they can use the dog to almost find that place that you were talking about, Sean. And not everybody can do that, right? Like, you've probably doing this a long time. You probably train your guys really, really well. Whereas a lot of people here, it's just kind of, they're just told like, oh, there's a box, put it every, and whatever's on the label, like put it every like 8 to 12 feet.
Meters. Yeah.
Right.
Every 5 meters if it's heavy, every 10 meters if it's thing. And it takes the brain work out of it, doesn't it?
And I think that's what you get here. I think it's just like this deployment of a device over and over and over again, and no actual thought into it. Now we would like to think that we are putting our boxes in places that are good for rats. Now we do have a little bit of a caveat to that, because we have a camera, so we can't always shove it right behind something, but we still have like a decent proportion of our boxes that are detected or entered, but 65% is still not enough, because if you still have like all of those rats, and I say all of those rats, I have to clarify that we still don't know how many rats. And I'm still getting to the haircut. This is definitely leading to the manscaping of rats. And so I think that Sean probably does have something to do with it. I just don't think that that's all that it has to do with it. So here we are trying to make it better, right? So we tested 3 different designs. We also tested, we kind of call it supplemental bait, but we're also kind of calling it priming, where you have like bait on the outside of your station. That's the same matrix as the bait on the inside, but obviously the non-toxic could be on the outside and the toxic could be on the inside. Now, I don't know, it worries me slightly that this worked so well, because I would never want the technicians to get the two mixed up and have the toxic outside accidentally or whatever, but it dramatically increased bait consumption. Now, another caveat, we were working with non-toxic bait inside and non-toxic bait outside. And mainly because if we were working with toxic bait inside, they'd be dead and they'd never come back again. And we wouldn't have known if the supplemental bait had actually increased the visitations to the bait station. So we haven't tested it with toxic bait, but I think that if it's the same matrix, it makes the entry, it substantially increases the entrances into the bait station, which for us in our system is part of the problem. is getting the rats into the boxes. Now, trying to get them to eat is a different story, but it did increase bait consumption as well. So like between trials where we didn't have bait outside and we did have bait outside, increased bait consumption as well. But remember, we also had substantially higher visits too. So that kind of makes sense. So we did that. And then I see a question here. Did we do work on scent lures? We did try a scent lure. We tried a commercially available scent lure, and it didn't increase visitations to the box either. And these things are like, do you guys have Yankee candles? Do you have those in the UK? Like, it's like the most offensive, like Yankee candle, and like I can see how they could. And we actually use the lures when we live trap rats in places where there's very, very high bait competition, because the smell is just it's very interesting and very strong. So yeah,
I have two things to add to that. So
sorry, what about using protein, putting some meat in a box?
Yeah, you could. I think that could work too. It's just the problem what we have here would be ants.
And also the fact that Rattus rattus largely frugivorous, so protein, animal protein, probably not.
Maybe not. Yeah, good point. Yeah.
As Norvegicus. So I used to work in a place called Church Farm many moons ago now, and we had large pens of captive rats that we were able to have a look at. And one of the things that's fascinating about rats is that and correct me if I'm wrong here, but from the reading that I've done and the research that I understand, when we smell something, it's linked very closely to memory. That smells like banana, that smells like strawberry, that smells like burnt toast, that smells like that. And you can kind of see that when someone walks up to you with a brand new perfume and sticks their arm under your nose and says, what does that smell like? And you're flabbergasted until they say that's cinnamon, and suddenly you can make that mental and associative leap. Now, with rats, they actually have special organs within the brain. Their noses, their olfactory sensors are hardwired to regions within the brain. And there's been some wonderful research which shows that when you put a specific scent underneath the nose of a rat, it will activate these barrels within the brain consistently and repeatedly every time. So when you hold vanilla under its brain, it will respond in such a way. When you hold I can't believe it's not vanilla artificial scent under its brain, it responds in a different way. So those rodents have a chemoreceptor, a gas chromatography suite built into their brains, and they can tell the difference between a natural and an artificial flavoring, despite the fact to us, because it is a historic event, a remembered event, we are unable to distinguish the difference between them. Now, with that, what we did in the pens at Church Farm is we took a lot of different flavors, some natural, some artificial, and we put them into pens. And there was, you'd imagine if scent played no part in choice, because we basically mixed these scents in with whole wheat grain. If scent played no part in the decision-making process, then all tubs should be eaten from equally, judging and accounting for positional bias and, other confounding factors. But it was very clear that things like natural scents, such as vanilla or peanut butter, were much more favorable to rodents, even the natural fruit flavors. But the artificial fruit flavors and the artificial flavorings were a lot less there was a much lower preference for them, which makes a lot of sense when we have a look at when we're trying to use lures. If we use a synthetic lure, like in the plastics, they have a very low coefficient of success. But when we start to use the natural lures that we find within our baits, because you can mix food grade material, and most of the time it is food grade material mixed in with baits, it can have, in my opinion, a much more significant effect on that animal's behavior. But that is simply my observations from the research done.
I mean, that would be similar to what we found as well. I mean, we didn't we tried and it didn't work. The good thing about the lures here is because we have like the competition with the ants and stuff like that. So in areas where we have a lot of ants, or in areas where we have very, very high food competition, we actually find that well, it seems like they work better, but we haven't actually tested it yet. So the jury is still out on that one. So yeah. Sorry?
I did quite an interesting thing on a farm. We had a game cover crop up the side of a field, and what happens every year is at the end of the season, the rats basically go along, they chew the base of the grain cover, the crop comes down, they eat the top of the crop. and this whole bankside was just filled with burrows. You know, like you're talking hundreds and hundreds of rats. And I thought, let's see if we can trap some here. So I dug some little wooden boxes in, put a trap in, and put a bait behind it to see if I could get it to go over. And there was hundreds of rats there, and they just wouldn't touch it under any circumstances. Like, they just wouldn't go in. And I ended up putting a full box in, just drilling, like, I think it was like a 16 or 20 mil hole. Well, it wasn't even 20, it would be like 16 mil in the front cover. Put a load of bait in it. And they're exactly the same box, but one was open with a bait in, and the other one had like a 16 mil hole. The rats come along, they chewed the opening in, went into the opening and emptied the boxes, which were harder to get into than the easy ones. And then what we found after that was, as soon as we put a trap in, we're baiting, would catch all the time, because obviously the opening had been chewed by the rats. They just loved
insane.
it.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel like you're trying to catch something that has two middle fingers stuck up at you the whole time? Like, just...
My child used to say to me, you've got to remember, they see it different to us.
Oh, they do, definitely.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, I'll caveat that with two things. Number one, if it was easy to kill rats and mice, we would have solved this problem 10,000 years ago at the beginning of the agricultural revolution, when we started to put food into pots and they decided they were going to be our best, worst friends for the rest of time. And we would have solved that problem the day after we invented that solution. And the fact we haven't means that they are a worthy adversary, and, you know, they stymie us at everything. But I love this. We always talk about this age-old expression, isn't it? Think like a rat. Think like a rat. You must always think like a rat. But in objective terms, it's nigh on impossible. We are visually orientated animals. We're looking at each other on the screen here. We're watching our lips move and the rest of it. Rodents have terrible eyesight and fantastic noses, and we have, you know, all right eyes, tremendous brains, and the world, you know, the animal kingdom's runner-up when it came to noses, realistically speaking. So to actually be able to put ourselves in the position of think like a rat it's a very special mindset to put yourself in, and it's very easy to get it wrong.
And I think we don't know enough about. I really don't think that we know enough. I mean, I was at a presentation last week. I was at the Rat Summit in New York City, and a presentation that was talking about the golden age of urban rat research in the 1960s. And I was like, we've come a long way from then. We've changed a lot. And like, I was like, it's silly to think that we have not done much new research. And like, part of it is like people. I don't think that there's a lot of people that find rats very glamorous. I mean, not us. Obviously, we love what we do. But there's not a lot, like, people are like, oh, what do you do? And I say I work with rats. They're like, why don't you work with like tigers and sharks and, you know, stuff like that? You know what I mean? Like, it's not very sexy. Like, whacking rats for a job is not very sexy. And then I think part of the problem is money too, right? And I think part problem as well is this whole, I think the idea that I don't think it's working as well as it could, and I think that we could do better with the tools we have, and I also think that we could do better if we have better tools.
Yeah, and it's you're absolutely right. It's a wildly underappreciated and undervalued career choice, which requires a huge amount of dedication and skill and discipline. You know, if you have to go out, regardless of wind, weather, or rain, to go and sort of like solve someone else's rodent issue, and yet it's wildly, especially in the UK, we are wildly underappreciated. I'm sure every industry feels that it is hard done by, but I kind of feel that pest management takes the biscuit. It's the absolute epitome of the not in my backyard scenario, where everyone wants it done, but they don't necessarily want to see it happen. It's a bit of a shame, really, isn't it? And as you say, there's so much more we could be doing if we had the support. And you've gone very fuzzy, which makes me think that I've been talking to a screen that is... Oh no, you're back again. How much of that did you hear? It's okay. I was just waxing. I was waxing lyrical. It wasn't anything important. Me on a high horse, as always. So yes, Hugh makes a really good point here, because you've kind of touched on this with what's happening in California, and there are large populations of human beings in both places like Amsterdam and in Paris, where there is a growing movement alongside cohabitation with rodents rather than what we do in pest management, which is the careful control and management of populations in areas of high risk. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I just mentioned I just came from New York City, and I just don't understand that city. I don't understand why people spend, like, you know, hundreds of Irish people go there on their holidays every year. They go shopping, whatever. It's the dirtiest, most disgusting place I've ever been in my whole entire life. There's rats everywhere, everywhere. I was there 5 minutes before I saw a mouse, which is kind of unusual enough for New York City. And then rats just everywhere, like everywhere. And like, it's not even fully nighttime and the rats are just everywhere. And the city's just so dirty. There's rubbish everywhere. It's just disgusting. I don't know if either of you have ever been to New York City, but I definitely don't recommend it.
I will be visiting the week after Pest World.
Oh, enjoy. Enjoy. Okay. It's just, I mean, I'm sure there's loads of great things about the city, but I just, I can't get over this, that, like, you walk into a place and I know you guys understand it, the smell of rats, right? And there's not many people that know the smell of rats, but if you work with them long enough, you just know that smell. And I have colleagues that can smell cockroaches too. And I just can't get over, and I mean, obviously New Yorkers probably don't know what the smell of rats is, but I just can't get over that they're okay about that many rats. Now, here's the thing as well. I live in Southern California. I live in a place called Huntington Beach, and I have rats in my backyard, tons of them. Now, I regularly try and send them to Jesus, but they're everywhere. They're in everyone's backyard. And like, my mother, when she comes to visit, will not set foot in the backyard because she knows that there's rats there. Because the amount of rats, for someone that's worked in small mammals in Ireland, the amount of rats that I've caught in traps or seen, I could go like this on my hand. And like Dublin's not the greatest, but like we have big bellies, right? We're like generally clean. Whereas here, there's rats everywhere, like everywhere. Like, I've been to airports that are filled with rats. The schools here are filled with rats. Like, I mean, it's disgusting. Like, and it's funny to me. I mean, it's funny to me that, sorry about that, folks. It's funny to me that, you know, and I'm never in the office, so I don't even know how to mute my phone. And that's going to drive me nuts if I take it off the hook. Anyway, so it's funny to me that people are so, like, okay with the rats around them here. Like, it just blows my mind. And I just don't get it. Like, my mother would not set foot in Ireland, or my sister, or anyone in my family, if they knew that there were rats anywhere. And like, it's almost normal here. I mean, it is normal here. And so it's like, part of that, I think, is the attitudes, I think, a little bit. But like, and I think part of it is that, like, none of us are dying from the plague. Yes, people are dying from leptospirosis in New York City, and we can't actually find it here in Southern California. We've looked for it and we can't find it. But like, there's not that many people dying from rodent-borne diseases.
Hang on a second. So, where did you say they're dying from lepto?
New York City.
Is that because that's more brown rats rather than roof rats, and they're more water orientated?
Yes,
I would also gather that a lot of old New York City has a lot of underground heating, which is done through steam vents. So there is a risk of transmission vector through wet, basically subterranean pipes pumping out warm, wet air.
Just don't wear flip-flops in New York City is all I'm saying, Lex. Just don't do it. Jesus. I mean, it's so disgustingly dirty in New York.
I was about to say, do I look like a man that wears flip-flops? And then I thought, actually, I've got long hair and a beard. I probably do.
I have no idea.
So, just changing the subject quickly for a second. If you've travelled around and you've moved around loads and you've seen black rats and Norway rats, etc., why do you think the tree rat, the black rat, hasn't really become established in the UK? Because we've only got like tiny little, I've never seen one. I don't really know anyone who has dealt with them. Like, why we not got them in huge numbers? Why have they failed to colonize here?
Go for it, Lex.
They were here first. They were the originals. So we had Rattus rattus and we had Rattus norvegicus, and then we got the grey squirrel from the US. And the grey squirrel is a much more prolific animal when it comes to being aggressive and living in trees. So they, gave the red squirrels squirrel pox, and they just simply wildly outcompeted the black rat. And so we really only find black rats in areas where they are consistently recruited by shipping and transport networks, but also in areas where we don't find the brown rat at the ground level, because underneath the concrete is generally the sea. And we don't find a lot of squirrels living in warehouse roofs, because it's nowhere near areas where they can get hold of easy food. So they've been kind of like pushed to these very niche environments in the UK by squirrels and brown rats, is my understanding.
But don't you have squirrels and brown rats over there? This is what I don't understand. Like, why do you think? Because you're saying that you've got like tree squirrels, ground squirrels, pack rats, you've got all this sort of stuff, but you're getting black rats in large numbers, aren't you? So why are you getting them in them numbers over there and we're not? Does that make sense?
I think they're separated niche-wise by time a little bit here as well, and they should have been in the UK, but the weather probably didn't suit them as much in the UK as well. Like the black rat or the roof rat or whatever you want to call it, ship rat, is kind of more of a like a Southeast Asian species, kind of like tropical, if you would so, right? And we all know there's nothing tropical about Ireland and England. I was talking to my sister this morning. It was blue sky one minute, and the next minute it was lashing, raining out of the heavens. But I think in California, I'm not sure. I mean, we have everything here, and I think we just have the space for it. We have the habitats for it. What's interesting is that often the Norway rat is thought of the kind of the urban rat, right? And the roof rat is kind of thought more as the more of an agricultural, and now it's different here. Agriculture is a lot different in California, right? Because we have a lot of tree crops. So like your citrus, your almonds, your walnuts, your like stuff like that. As opposed to in Ireland, we've mostly grass. People ask me what we grow in grass. I think 95% of Ireland's economy is grass. But in California, it's very, very different. So there's lots of areas for roof rats to proliferate. But what's interesting is that, like, why are roof rats only in these major metropolitan areas? And as you move out, there's like none of them. So like in my county, which is right next to Los Angeles County that I live in, we know of one spot that there's Norway rats. And it's actually a transfer station, like a recycling transfer station. And we've caught Norway rats, we've caught roof rats, and we've caught fancy rats, which are probably hybrids, right, between a domestic and a
what?
A fancy rat, like a pet rat.
Right.
Yeah. So like, but it's not pet; it's like wild. So like, I'm not really sure what you call it, like a feral something or other. Like, and it's like they're like two different colors. So it's like a Norway rat that looks like one of those horses that's like black and white. You know what I mean? Like a piebalds type thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've seen though. We've said there used to be so away from rats and onto rabbits. Village I grew up in over in Surrey, would you believe? But basically there was one lane where forests all along one side, one big long country road, and we used to see hundreds of bunny rabbits down there, and then one day there was a bright white bunny sat in, obviously someone's pet, and there was a big effort by the village to reclaim this big one white bunny. Nobody could get hold of it. It basically became king of the bunnies. But the great thing is for the next couple of years there were baby bunnies kicking about, young bunnies with little white spots on them and big piebald patches and saddles on them, where this thing obviously had been like, because it was a much bigger, well-fed rabbit, just it just tore through that, harem of bunnies out at the side of the road. So it does happen, and you see it, quite often with pet rats getting out, and people breed them for funny, fancy coats. I used to do it. I used to breed them so they had no fur. They look like baby little hippopotamus. They're adorable. Sean doesn't approve of any of my hobbies. I breed a lot of insects. I breed a lot of reptiles.
I just think for someone so clever and so fucking like, why the fuck do you want a rabbit with no fucking coat on? What happened in your life where you thought, I know the solution to this? It's a rabbit with no fur.
No, not a rabbit, a rat.
A rat with no fur. Like what? Why?
But that kind of gets us back to the manscaping, which we kind of forgot about.
Yeah. Go to manscaping, yeah, because I don't even know about this baldy rat thing.
So the reason we're manscaping rats is because we back to kind of the population and how they use the bait station, right? We don't actually know from our work is it many rats, or is it that just one fecker that's like, oh, I'm just going to come back over and over and over and over and over again. So we decided that we were going to do like a pilot study basically and try to catch loads of rats and try and mark them and to see if we can detect the individuals. Now, marking rats is not that easy, or manscaping rats is not that easy. And so we decided that we were going to put pit tags in them. And pit tags, I don't know if your listeners are familiar with them, are basically the same kind of things that you put in your the neck of your dog. Yeah. So if your dog gets lost, they can scan your dog and know that you own them. So we built
RFID tags.
Yes, RFID. Yeah. They're passive integrated transponders, I guess, but RFID, exactly the same thing. And so we built an antenna, we built the reader in the bait station, basically. So the reader is in it's in the doorway in between the vestibule and where the bait is. Mm-hmm. So the rat not only has to go into the bait station, it kind of has to try and engage with the bait for it to read. And there's also trouble that it could set it off from the top, right? Because these RFID readers, it's kind of like a range thing. And we've kind of combated that because like the little computer that we have that records the chip, right? It's kind of like a deconstructed thing that they would use basically in the veterinary surgery to try and figure out who your dog is. That's like on the top of the bait station with like a plastic container on the top of it to keep it dry and, irrigation, all that kind of stuff. So about 2 or 3 weeks ago at my office, which will just go to show you about the attitudes with rats, we caught 32 rats over 4 nights, and we put these RFID chips in them. But it's expensive. It costs lots of money. And so we wondered if we could shave a pattern into the rats to make them individually identifiable on our cameras. And so my hobbies, Sean, are not that much better than Lex's, apparently. And so, but it was so funny because there's 3 of us, me and 2 of my students, and we were out working off the back of the truck, and one of them was like shaving like a T or like, and I always think it's like, you guys, I mean, I don't know if you have the equivalent in the UK, but we have OM, which is like a very old way to write things, which is a line down the middle and then these little different strikes off either side. And we were trying to kind of just go with something like that, but like we would draw them down and I was like, what's that? And someone would be like, oh, that looks like a fish, or that looks like an atomic bomb. Like the patterns we were getting were wild. But one of my students shaving down, I'm taking a little video, and my other student's like, oh, we should post this to Amazon reviews and tell people how good their manscaper is at shaving rats. And I was like, oh, Lord Jesus. I was like, I don't think anybody wants to know that you can shave a rat. But maybe, Lex, you do. Maybe you do. Who knows? But
it's much easier than playing with genetics if I can just shave them.
Yeah, so we chip them, we shave them, and we have to shave them on both sides as well. And we don't use anesthetic. We're like proper rat cowboys over here. Like, we're not no sissies that can't handle live rats. So we got them, chipped them, shaved their backsides basically into different patterns, 32 individual different patterns, which takes a lot of imagination, to be fair, because there's not that many different varieties of lines and stuff. And it's funny, like they're really easy to shave one way, but not really easy to shave the other way. And so the things we were learning, and so we let them all go. We have 16 bait stations around the office, and we're going to monitor them for another week because we're interested to see like how many of those go into the bait stations, right? And then when we're done with that, we're going to load in some toxic bait. We're going to try and send as many of them as we can to Jesus, and then come back through after 30 days with live traps and see who's left, or at least who we can detect. Now, we can detect a lot of them with the game cameras that we have out, but we're going to live trap them and send them to Jesus.
I have 2 questions. I desperately have 2 questions. Number one, surely by capturing the rats in the first place, you are introducing a like subconscious bias because you have caught animals predisposed to being caught, so they're already predisposed to engaging with man-made objects. So there is an element of bias there, surely.
Oh, completely. And so that's why they're marked as well, and that's why we have cameras, so like we'll be able to see what percentage of the population that is not captured, right? And so we'll be able to tell, because people are like, oh, that rat will never do anything, it'll never, like, people, and often I hear the opposite Lex argument to that, where people are saying, oh, because you've handled them now, they'll never go near anything ever again. And I think that your argument's actually probably more correct, because we do recapture these animals, and recapturing roof rats actually is not that easy, but we have done it. And so you could say yes, but I think what we will look at is we'll look at the response from the marked individuals and the response from the unmarked individuals, and we will be able to correct for that bias. We just won't know. We won't know if it's multiple unmarked individuals. That's the only thing. Unless there's very particular, like one of them has big balls, or one of them is, juvenile or whatever, that kind of way.
They all do. So my other question is, there's a lot of stress involved with shaving the animals. In previous labs I've worked alongside and with, to identify animals in lab cages, what they and we would do is you would end up doing markings on the tail. So you basically do a band on the tail. Now, if you take a 5 band and you do thick and thin, you've got a binary system where you can count to 32 with 5 bands. So how come you decided to forego conventional?
So we could have done banding, and a lot of banding is done in colored now, and I guess we should have done thick and thin. I never really thought about thick and thin, to be really honest with you. So I guess we should have done this podcast 4 weeks ago, and we wouldn't have had to buy 2 manscapers off thing and put in really dodgy expense reports to the university about why I need 2 manscapers to shave me rats. It's actually one of my favorite hobbies, is to try and freak out our purchasing people. I'm like, I need this to chop up the insides of the coyote. Like, they're like, why do you need a machete? To cut off a coyote's head, of course. Why else would you need a machete?
In fact, better get me 2, just 1 for each hand. Choppy chop chop chop. I want to come and work with you. I think that would be tremendous fun. The last question I had, and this is something I've been thinking for a while, is that actually a lot of animals, their coats will fluoresce different colors under UV, especially animals that are crepuscular. So rodents can see into the near ultraviolet because they're looking for urine markers and urine pillars. And there's a lot of me that suspects that there is an element of not fluorescence, but reflectance when it comes to UV in rodent coats. Anyone ever looked into this? Because that would be a really novel way of identifying them, is just using a UV torch and basically marking the backs of them, because that would make them, it wouldn't highlight them to predators, it wouldn't alter their behavior. You could literally just put a little bit of UV hair dye on them in a stripe, and you could do that with a brush as they walked in and out of the cages. It could literally brush UV dye into their coats without ever having to touch them.
We had to capture them, right? But I think if you didn't want to capture them, I think that could work too. And like for us, because of the way we mount our cameras in the front, you could mount it on the top. So like if you had a brush on the top, you just have to change the mount of your camera. But yeah, I think that, there's no way, there's no reason to think that it wouldn't work, but you wouldn't get individual marks. So,
everyone says that rats are incredibly clever, so could you not just ask them politely who their name is?
It's like, what's your name? What's your number?
Well, it depends how far you want to get. With the, because the scent markings that they leave in their urine and the feces can go all the way down to individual recognition. So,
you could do DNA, obviously, which would be actually ideal. I just don't have millions and millions and millions of dollars, unfortunately. But like that would be the most ideal, is that you would do sampling outside your bait station and sampling inside your bait station. And so you would know then from the DNA profiles of what the hair that's left, you just use like double-sided sticky tape or something. Like it'd be that simple. and you would use like maybe like a grain tray or something to try and get hares for like the ones that don't want to go into the bait station. And that would be ideal. 100% someone should steal that idea and go for it and do it, because it would be a really, really great study that I do not have the money to do right now. But if somebody is watching and would like to pay me to do such a study, absolutely. We're kind of like science sluts. We'll do whatever you want if you give us money. Yeah, pretty much.
I seen a pest control. I used that sort of theory perfectly this week. Or was it last week? He was dealing with rats and drains for a housing association. Had pointed out that the rats were coming through the drains. That had a survey done. Wasn't a very good survey, but the survey said no faults in the drains, and he was stuck, like, because the drainage guys are saying the drains are fine, it's not that, and the housing association was screaming and shouting at him. So he took a load of Detex blocks, banged it in the drains, let them eat it, and then walked around the loft and shone and found their piss and stuff like that. Well, the Detex blocks have come from the drains through the rats, and they're now in your loft. Get them to explain that. So now we're going to do the drain survey as a result of it. And I thought, isn't that like, that is proper, like, that's proper pest control, isn't it? Like, you're not just fighting against the rats, you're fighting against this and that and da-da-da. And for one little thing and understanding what they've done, he solved it. Like, he solved it perfectly. That was incredibly clever. That was
so good.
That's good.
Yeah, we love that. I love anything like that.
This is why pest control is such a fascinating and wonderful profession, is because every day is a new challenge. It's a new problem to solve. There's always going to be a question. There's always going to be a puzzle to try and figure out. And as long as you are suitably minded, it's going to be a game that you will play. You know, the rats will outlive us. We will still be fighting and battling rats for, you know, well before, you know, well after we're all dust. You know, it's going to be a long time. But please tell us, because we're coming to the end of the podcast now. So what have been the preliminary there we go, findings of your study so far? You say you're 4 weeks in. What have you found so far? I mean, obviously
we're only 2 weeks in, and the first week they didn't go near the stations. So second week we had a lot more action on our bait, and we're using non-toxic bait again. So we definitely have detections in there. And these are like, it's like in the experiment where we looked at the 3 different bait stations, I think there was 800,000 images to go through. And we don't have AI. We have very dedicated students that are literally going through the photos, and like we have programs to help us take you know, take different things like that. It'll automatically take the time and like this, like, you know, program in the place or whatever, but like you still have to go in. Is that rat male? Is it, you know, did it go into the bait station? All that has to be programmed in. So it's long. So are you going to go to Pest World?
I am, yes.
Well, you will hear the results there.
Oh, you are presenting?
Yeah.
That's cutting it close to the wire.
Yeah, it is very close. We won't have actually finished the whole thing, but we'll have the preliminary non-toxic part of it done. So
one thing I found that when I was having to go through like hundreds of photos like that for very similar studies, stack the images, break them into batches, stack them up, because then you can look at 500 at a go, and if there's no movement on there'll be no smears on the image stack, so you can discount 500 in a pot.
Yeah, we use something called Photo Mechanic, which is actually really helpful. So you can actually like key code your variables, I guess, like rat present, rat entry, rat discovery, and so like 1 is 1 and 1 is 2, and so it flicks through, and so as you flick through them, you don't have to open them up individually, so they're basically stacked, and so you can tell if there's like you said, like it's amazing that your brain can detect literally. Like I'm like backwards here, but like literally like a whisker like that, right? Just coming in from the side, or like like a whisker just coming in. Yeah, it's amazing.
Oh, it's great. I mean, it's amazing how quickly an hour goes, isn't it? Especially when you start nerding out about something. It's so. I have one last question, but before we bring this to a close, and you talked about basically pre-baiting, using non-toxic monitors as a pre-bait. Now, one of the things that strikes me that as being a little bit worrisome is there no worry that things like passerine birds will move into the boxes more readily? You know, because we're talking about observing boxes. If you leave a breadcrumb trail like Hansel and Gretel leading into the boxes. So actually, I know it will increase acceptance and engagement with target species, but things like passerine birds, we're talking things like sparrows here, will they not be more willing to engage with a box if you have left a trail in there, or have you not observed
I
that?
don't know, but we would have that data, and it's something that we can absolutely 100% look into. My biggest concern is the absent-minded technician, that like the one that doesn't give a shit, right? And I mean, they're not listening to this podcast, that's for sure. But they're they're the ones that are just kind of just trying to get through the day, or maybe there's something on their mind or whatever, and they just get confused and they put the wrong thing outside the bait station. That's what would worry me more than anything. And I think it could happen. I mean, it's not a recommendation we're making yet. We're just saying that it's there and it's interesting. But I think that it would be great to go back and look at the data and actually see, does it have any effect on like non-targets entering the box? I don't think so, but we'll go in and look.
I am all in favour. So I think not that Sean and I have very different opinions on this, as does Hugh. But I think non-toxic monitoring is a wildly underused tool in our toolkit, and if it's used in the correct way, it can significantly augment and increase the efficacy of any chemical control program, whilst at the same time reducing a lot of the risks around there as well.
I mean, I'm not really advocating for because you would use it while there's toxic bait inside the thing, because like one of the things that we have a problem with is that, and this is one of the things that we're interested in with our manscaped rats is that our rats going into bait stations more than once. And if they're going into bait stations only once, the shit better be something in there that kills them when they get in there. And so if they're not going to come back again, you don't want to miss your opportunity. But we don't know yet if that actually happens.
They must, because a lot of the rodenticides offered, so the calciferols, the multi-feed, so bromadiolone, bromidiphenol, warfarin, they all require between 6 and 14 grams to achieve a lethal dose in an average size animal, which is by definition, that's with brown rats, that's almost half of a daily feed for cholecalciferol. It's a third of their daily intake for diphenocum, and a sixth for its bromadiolone. But with that is going to be by definition at least 1 to 2 feeding events across the day. So rodents must return to the bait stations multiple times, otherwise they never ever would have achieved a lethal dose if it was a simple single event.
I think some
do. Okay.
But I don't know yet. We will find out.
Tell you the one thing I would say though, Niamh, when we talk about technicians and how your research can help them, if we take the box out of the situation and we talk about traps, we do that a lot in lofts, what you're talking about, and it's a massive game changer on getting rats to accept, because getting the rat to accept the trap is always the hard thing. Because if you went and you threw that bait down in exactly the same place, but it wasn't on a trap, they'd come over and eat it, put it on a trap, and they just don't like it, do they? So we'll happily go out, put 10 free samples and then one on the trap. And when you go there, I guarantee you 100% the last one eaten is the one on the trap, but you will catch it. You'll go there, there'll be a dead rat on a trap, but there'll be no free samples taken at all. Like, no. So like that, what you're talking about there is absolutely beneficial for pest controllers. I don't know about black rats because we don't deal with them. Like, could you put baits in the rafters, like 2 or 3, and then have a trap of one on and get them that way?
And interestingly enough, we've also collared roof rats, right? We've put little and they're not really GPS collars, and they're also not like kind of your VHF collars. It's a different system, and we've looked at the effectiveness of different techniques. So we've looked at like trapping only, we've looked at second generation anticoagulants only, and we've looked at a mix of the two, so a mix of second gens and snap traps. And interestingly enough, the snap traps, which I would never have thought in a million years that snap traps would have come out higher than the second gens, but they did. And our snap traps were inside bait stations, Sean, which I think is totally different to snap traps outside bait stations. I think snap traps outside bait stations are even, like, I'm not saying they're easier, they're just they're easy, they're just easier. And so I think it was like almost like a decision making kind of thing. Whereas like if a rat has to go into a bait station, it has to go into it more than once to die, more than likely, right? For or it has to go in and has to eat enough. Or it has to go in and it has to decide that it wants to eat, and then it has to eat enough. Whereas you don't get many decisions with a snap trap, right? You decide to engage or not, and that's it. If you do engage, you're dead. If you don't engage, you're fine. And I think that's one of the reasons why the traps outperformed the second gens. Now, we could have had resistance issues. We don't know. We're working on that, but we don't know a lot about resistance in roof rats in the US. We could have had like in migration that we couldn't have monitored. We don't think so, given the home range of the rats that we tracked. But that it could have been something like that. But there was something going on. But the thing about it is that it was taken like 60 to 70 days for us to kill our 10 marked rats. And it's exceptionally long, right? And so we haven't published on it yet. We will, but there's too many. I have too many pies and not enough fingers, basically, at the minute. But yeah, that's basically what's and I think Sean, like you were saying, like if you can get into like a space where you don't have to use a bait station, I actually think you can be way more successful. And there's lots of evidence in the literature to say that it's like the container of the food is a problem. Now, granted, a trap is a container of food too, but we pre-bait when we do live trapping. We call it sprinkles. We just get our bait and we put it all over the trap and like in front of the trap, around the trap, everywhere, and we just kind of like sprinkle the stuff, and then we leave it open usually for 2 or 3 nights. Now, as a pet, like that's like the model here. It's different for me, right? I'm not, we're doing it for research. So it's okay for us to go back over and over and over again. It's hard for you guys to go back over and over and over again. That's a lot of money. And so I'm not like, we always suggest that you pre-bait, but people just won't do it. It's a 30-day, here it's a 30-day service and nothing else. People are very inflexible because it's very, very costly.
Yeah. So there's 2 things with it. Absolutely. I mean, number one, it's why I've never particularly rated the T-Rex traps. Sorry to drop names of products here, but you can't leave them unset with bait in them because they're naturally they're closed at that point, so they make it quite difficult. But when you talk about rodents and you know I've read studies before, and I've actually tried to validate studies down on the farm with my lads around neophobia, and neophobia is one of those things that we use as an umbrella, and we actually use, I believe, quite erroneously, because you have spatial neophobia, which is a fear of new spaces, and that's why we get rat runs. We get object neophobia, which is the fear of the bait box and the snap trap in there. And this is the interesting one, because I do have some really good pictures of this. Got some bait boxes made with clear lids and the rest of it. There is food neophobia, or food preference fear, and you will see rodents go into bait boxes and they will stare at the bait, and then they'll withdraw and they'll leave, and then the next day they'll come in and potentially come into, and they'll dig through it, they'll dig through the bait but not eat anything, and you'll see disturbances to all of that bait, and then the day after that they'll come and eat it, and it's only when, as you say, you're coming back every single day do you see things like this, because it gives you a much more granular view on what's going on, because you get to see day by day as opposed to week by week or even month by month.
So do you guys know then if so here in roof rats, what we get a lot, the behavior we get a lot is we get a lot of roof rats on top of stations. Do you guys get that with Norways too? Yeah,
don't pick up on it.
Yeah, it's a great place for a glue board if you can use it and not outside, obviously. I don't know if you guys can use glue boards anymore. I know they're gone too. I'm sure they're gone for us as well, probably. But it's a really interesting behavior, because I don't think they're afraid of the box, Lex. Like, I don't think it's no,
just won't go in. So when we were building our boxes on that farm, one of the things that we put consideration into was heightened movement. I always say you're looking for movement, because people forget that they're relatively lazy. We think they're not, but they are. They're like us. So if they can cut a corner, they will. So if you can get the rat traveling head first into it, but it's so easy on a standard box for it to just hop over it, it takes no effort. So we built ours a lot higher and would happily stack stuff, because then all of a sudden when it's going along, the easy way is to go through. And then once we had them going through, we had acceptance and would just catch them over and over again. Like,
but it's so interesting. It's so interesting that they went into the ones that they chewed as opposed to the ones that they could have just gone in easy. That's so interesting.
And yeah, because if you think about it, that opening now, what that opening is saying to the rat is, rats have passed through here on multiple occasions. There is a reason for you to come in here. So when they go along, they're like, it's safe. That's where we want to be. It got to the point where what we had to do was we were stapling on wire mesh, and we were cutting a hole in the wire mesh, because once it started chewing the box, they would chew the box so much that the box like was missing a whole corner or a side. So we ended up wrapping it in metal and giving them only that, so they could constantly use that bit. Otherwise we're replacing boxes that quickly, because once they started, they just wouldn't stop and they would just go nuts, and then anything could get in.
There's a huge amount of...
Try and dig them out. I took some photos of the front of the boxes, dug into the bank side, and it was like you would not have believed it. It was almost like, because that hole was small and they were sitting outside chewing, it was almost safe. Whereas when they had a big hole, the option was, do I go in or not? And the answer was always not. But then when it was a little hole, it was like, we'll chew, we'll squeeze our way in, and then it was game on after that. They would just keep smashing it.
I've got a theory as to that, but before I give my theory, what's your theory as to why that is a pre-validator for rodent behavior?
I don't know. It might be just they want to make their own size hole. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, they do obviously naturally rodents like to chew as well, and maybe it's like an investigation thing where they spend so much time trying to investigate it and know that it's safe that they go in. I have no idea. It's funny because
sorry, just to let you know, on some of them they would dig and they would chew under the box to get in.
See. Okay, my thoughts on this is twofold. If you imagine a box with a hole already in it, filled with food, that to a rodent is a cache. So that's another animal's cache. That is a hole in a, for that. Let's take that away from box. The most clearest. Okay, wait for it. But that's a cache of food, isn't it? It's another animal's cache of food because it's got an entrance in and out. Now, if it's all closed up, what else does a rodent encounter that's fully enclosed, that's full of food? Is a seed pod or something like that. So if they have to chew their way in, it's engaging that natural behavior to break into something to get the food on the inside. And if they're the one breaking in, they're the first one in there. So the likelihood of finding someone else in there or being disturbed by someone else when you're in there is significantly lower. And then after they've done it, they've left saliva, they've left urine, they've left feces smeared on those, which are filled with these scent mark proteins, which will validate the behavior within that box as part of that clan, that group, and makes it safe. So that would be my...
I did wonder as well if it was the amount of time that they were sitting outside. So like if it's an open thing, imagine in that scenario, then rats are probably moving all the time and not sitting still that much. But for it to chew that hole, it has to be there for a little period of time. And I almost got the impression that it was like, well, we're safe to sit here. It's a safe.
That was kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah. Safe place to sit. But it definitely was a game changer for us when we spotted it. My pal just used to say to me all the time, remember, they see it different to us. Whatever you think you're seeing, however you think you're seeing it, they're seeing it different to us. And I used to think, fucking hell, remember drilling a hole and come back and I was like, you little bastards. Like, do you know what I mean? You little swines. Like, yeah. And then you come back next week and the whole side of the box was demolished. And you're like, another problem to solve. Another problem. I'll tell you what, it's winter now and the farms will kick off shortly. So I'll set some up and I'll show you what we're doing. I'll try and take some videos and some pictures and things like that.
You can get a couple done before Pestworld. I'll take some over. That'll be a weird one to take him out carry-on luggage, won't it? Why have you got a bit of plywood with just some great big teeth marks in it?
Don't use plywood because it'll come to pieces. You use pine boards. Yeah. But yeah, just quickly before you go, you might ask the question: what offerings on the trap are you using? I use boilies, like fish and boilies, the fish meal, the protein. Truthfully, I don't think it makes a difference what you use within reason. I think it comes down to the way you put it around. Is Niamh saying if you sprinkle it round or whatever, whenever it comes to trapping, you'll get your own preferences that work for you, and it'll just go. Hugh says it here. Have you heard of a black cat trap? Do you use them over there, Niamh?
Are they those like tombstone type ones?
Tombstone ones.
Yeah. So they work
I've
a little
heard
bit
of them.
different.
I have never seen them over here.
Yeah. So the way it works is there's a bait cup
More
in the
things for
bottom,
hand luggage.
going to fill with porridge, but then the trigger mechanism is actually lifting.
Yeah.
So this is why the work, I think, because the rat goes, eats a bit of porridge, eats a bit of porridge, eats a bit of porridge, and he gets and then all of a sudden he grabs the jelly and lifts it up and he gets walloped on the head. So if you can use that same thing, use porridge, or by all means, but put 3 or 4 little dollops of porridge around, and then one in the middle of your snapback trap or your whatever. And I think that will definitely, I'm sure that'll work. I'm going to have a go as well at a different trap this year, so I'll keep it quiet. I've just got the parts for it downstairs for rats and lofts, and we'll see if that theory works, because I think it absolutely will. Absolutely will. But Hugh, this was my mindset to it. The harder you make it for them to get in, it's more like they seem absolutely adamant, don't they? You give them a wheelie bin, they'll chew the rubber plug out, they'll get on the top and they'll chew through the side and they'll drop in and they're comfortable. Like, make it easy for them, and they don't seem to like it. Don't know. Thoughts?
Seed pod. It's a big seed pod.
Big seed
Or
pod.
rats
Love
or
it.
dicks. I mean, there's that too.
They deserve to be sent to Jesus.
We are gonna use that, I think, a lot in the podcast going forwards.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that brings us up to the end of the show and on to our last. We have 3. I'm not sure if you've ever watched any of our podcasts before, but we ask every one of our guests the same 3 questions at the end of the podcast. So, Sean, do you want to go first, or shall I go first this time?
You can go first out.
Okay. So, have you enjoyed your time on the podcast?
Absolutely. Of course I have. Definitely. It's been really enjoyable. It's really great to talk to people that know what they're doing, and you guys are very well read, which is really impressive. And I mean, this is part of my job. Like, I always don't want to be so separated from the problem that I don't understand it, because then I can't help.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So, and yeah, give us a shameless plug.
Well, I would normally shamelessly plug the West Coast Rodent Academy that we host twice a year every year, but we do sell out twice a year every year. But if anyone wants to come that's listening in the US, they're more than welcome. You can just Google West Coast Rodent Academy and it'll come up. But it's a really great forum for learning about rodent control. We have a lot of breakout sessions. I would say that our exclusion breakout session is probably one of the best breakouts I've ever been to my whole entire life, where it's proper hands-on. You're not stuck in the classroom all day. I mean, you're stuck in the classroom for some of the day. We also feed you well, which is very, very important to our pest control professionals over here as well. I think pretty much everywhere. It's usually every March and November. This year it's October 9 to 11, but we're oversold. So we're that's actually why I was a little bit late, is because I was trying to figure out how to shove a square peg in a round hole, trying to get more attendees into our room. So I was kind of distracted.
Think like a rat. Go vertical. Start double stacking them.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'll be at Pest World. I'm talking on the Thursday of Pest World, so if anyone's going to be there, Lex, it'd be great to see you. I would love if you put a tombstone trap in your luggage. I'd definitely like to see one in the flesh and give it a go.
I travel light, and I've been given 25 kilos of baggage allowance, so I can bring all kinds of weird stuff out.
Yeah, and if there's anything you want back from the US, let us know, and we'll have it there too. So.
Absolutely. There'll be a
I have a talk, and then we have a table as well at Pest World as part of the University of California's integrated pest management program too.
Oh, perfect. I will be there. I will be there, and there will be questions, and you will want to be rid of me by lunchtime on Thursday. Don't you worry.
It's okay. I'll be 4 days away from my tiny human, so I'm hoping that I'm just gonna sleep the sleep of the dead.
Oh, excellent stuff. Well, the very last question that we ask everyone is, who would you nominate to come on next? Who would you like who would you like to hear from in your seat, or to sit in your seat?
Well, there's a lot of great. I mean, obviously, I'm going to plug the US people, but there. Also, have you guys ever heard of or had anyone from the Vancouver Rat Project on your podcast? It's
Not
a
yet.
really, huh?
Not yet.
I would definitely recommend it. I think you would enjoy my anthropologist friend from UCLA. Quite a different outlook to pest control, but I think it's good to have to know and understand all different sides. There's a lot of great industry people as well in the US. I was just very, very distracted by Sylvia Kenmure from BASF, people like Ed Dulchin from Catchmaster. There's just really great people with just excellent technical knowledge, really good idea of the challenges, especially here in California too, because California is a difficult place to manage anything. They just keep taking tools away and not giving anything back. So there's a lot of interesting here. Yeah.
It's going to be very interesting. Now, I know, Sylvie, I'm going to be sitting my ACE International end of this year.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Sylvia's my PMP mom. She helps me navigate the politics of the industry. So, yeah, she often knows that I've done bad things before I even know that I've done bad things.
I will enjoy getting to know the both of you a lot better when I come over, I think. That would be amazing. Wonderful stuff. And yeah, so much love coming in on the comments. I can't see if you sort of like see them all scrolling up there, but I think people have really enjoyed this one today. So thank you ever so much. This has been absolutely amazing. And who would have thought a podcast about giving rats haircuts would have been so just fascinating at the end of the day.
Well, thanks, folks. Really enjoyed it.
No worries. Okay, well, with that, I think we're going to call this to a close. So thank you ever so much, and we'll see you all later. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Beauties and Beasties podcast.